Hello everybody, I hope you're doing well today. And today I want to beg the question, why are axes so awful? Because while many people say that the worst class of weapon in this game is flails, and I suppose torches if you're really counting those as weapons, I would honestly wager that axes are at least in the bottom two things you can use in the game. And there's a bunch of reasons that I believe this, and to start off, the reason that I would say that axes are worse than flails. Now, granted, I should say this as well. There are outliers when it comes to axes. There are axes that actually do serve quite a bit of purpose. But in terms of like what the sort of like baseline is, the status quo, I think it is almost irredeemably low for this weapon class. So the thing is that when it comes to like say a axe like say the battle axe, which doesn't have certain things going for it that other axes do, I would say that flails potentially are better than that. And I know, preposterous, flails are by far the worst weapon in the game. Well, the thing is that at least they're not parryable and they have hyper armor, whereas I would argue that axes borderline have nothing unless it is one of a couple. And so this strength build I have here is showing off four of the ones that I do think actually have a good use case. And while looking at all of the others, I couldn't really think of a great reason to use any of the others other than random utility, such as having the sacrificial axe on your hip to get back some extra FP when enemies die. So the four in question are the Stormhawk Axe, which is by far the most used axe in the game. You have the Cleaver, the Warped Axe, and you have the Hand Axe. And I'm gonna talk about each of these. I think some are definitely better than others. So we're gonna first start with the Storm Axe because it kind of, in a way, doesn't count in my book at least, because the Stormhawk Axe is made and broken by its Ash of War. All of you guys should already know that the Ash of War of the Stormhawk Axe is one of the most quintessential get-off-me tools an invader can have in the game. So whether you're using a strength or dexterity build, or if you're a weird duckling and using the quality build, the Stormhawk Axe is going to be one of your most premier get-off-me tools, which is extremely valuable. But there's really nothing else about the moveset that screams anything of worth, because other than that, it's going to be the standard battle axe-esque moveset, which is something we will be getting into more with the Warped Axe. Now, I should mention as well that the Hand Axe is perhaps the biggest outlier in terms of how good axes are, because a one-handed hand axe has such a fast R1 that it's actually a very good offhand weapon. The offhand axe, I heard this, I did not test it, please correct me if I'm wrong. I heard that it is the second fastest thing you can use, or is at least tied for it, as an offhand weapon. So as you'll see in some of the footage here later on, you will see me using a main hand halberd with an offhand hand axe, and it's really strong. It is a fantastic weapon to pair with something slower, which is great. But there's only like 2 or 3 axes that have that faster version of the moveset. I think the Forked Axe has it, if I'm not mistaken, the one that those imps use, and then the Hand Axe, and then I couldn't think of any others that actually use it. But next is the Cleaver, and the Cleaver, honestly, its R1 looks more like a hammer's, to be honest, like the Stone Club. But regardless, it is going to be a weapon that is carried by its R2. It is an example of a very unique R2 in this game, and the reason why is because as you're charging it, you run at your opponent, meaning that they cannot simply just roll back over and over and safely get out of range unless they're light rolling. So it's not really a weapon that's going to do very well at all in invasions, because you don't have enough range or horizontal sweep to be able to hit multiple enemies that are on you. And you're already working harder than your opponent is if they're using something meta, to make this weapon work. And since it doesn't have, as far as I can tell, it doesn't have hyper armor when you're charging that R2, you either need to use Endure, or you need to be fighting someone that, for some reason, is not R1ing out of hit stun. So if you get those stars to align, sure, it feels quite nice. But when those things are working against you, which they often do, the weapon feels quite bad for invasions. It's really only when you get someone by themselves that it feels like you're really able to get a whole lot out of any of the cleavers. And you know, I mean, it does happen. It does happen where you get a 1v1, but, like, you really should swap to a different weapon if 2 or 3 people have their attention on you. Now let's talk about the Warped Axe, and by proxy, essentially the sort of, like, standard moveset of axes. So the Warped Axe is interesting because its damage is absolutely crazy for a weapon of this speed. Because as far as I can tell, the Warped Axe originally was going to be a Great Axe, but they decided before release to make it just a standard axe, so it has very high damage for something as quick as it is. Now, granted, axes are not very fast on average when it comes to the average ones, so, you know, me saying this really isn't saying all that much. But you can throw something, say, like Spinning Slash or especially Swords Dance on the... Here I am watching myself fat rolling. I saw the offhand S-Stock and I was like, man, I really need some poise. And I start fat rolling like the absolute Chad I am. Yeah, I'm so good at this game, bro. But, yeah, anyway... You do have what's I would consider the standard axe moveset on this thing. And this is where it really reveals itself as, like, one of the worst classes of weapons in the entire game, in my opinion. So, first things first, almost no axe has anything resembling range. Like, all of them are so intensely short that it feels impossible to hit your opponents. And what makes that worse is that, say, unlike weapons like fist weapons, which have a lot of forward momentum making up for their range discrepancy, you don't really have that good of forward momentum at all with axes. It doesn't really matter if they're one-handed, two-handed, or, God forbid, power-stanced, which might actually just be the worst moveset in the game, is the power-stance moveset that hammers and axes get. It's like, Jesus Christ, like, you guys couldn't make it more obvious that we were not giving the slightest shit when deciding how to balance these things. But, yeah, essentially, like, you do have a running R1 that is at the very least able to roll catch, but it's still very telegraphed. Like, I mean, you're reeling your whole body into the R1, so even though it is got enough of a run forward to catch somebody, they do have to be panic rolling, essentially. And yeah, like, you can forget about using any of your R2s, unless you're using the Cleaver, of course, but once again, I'm talking about weapons like the Warped Axe. You can essentially forget about using your R2s because not only do they have just as shit of range, if not more shit than the R1s, but they are so impossibly slow, and they're like vertical overhead strikes as well, that, I mean, I just don't understand who these weapons are supposed to be appealing to. Oh, so watch this. Yo, Horaloo's Earthshaker is really bad, but it is so funny against people who don't know that you should just jump over it. But yeah, anyway, the weapon doesn't really have, in my opinion, any redeeming qualities that scream like, hey, this is the reason that you would use this weapon or this class of weapon. Well, I should take that back a little bit. Like, you do have the hand axe, you do have the Cleaver R2, but I mean in terms of, say, the Warped Axe, because it's like all of your moves are super reactable, you have negative range, and then it's like it doesn't even get made up for by having a really strong power stance moveset. The first hit of the power stance, like running L1s and stuff like that, don't even poise break, and even if they do, they don't true combo into the second hit, which is a whole, like, year after the first hit. So, I mean, I don't know. It's just weird to me. It's just weird to me that axes have kind of like, ever since Dark Souls 2, gotten progressively worse. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't understand wanting to make a weapon class, the combination of both bad and uninteresting, right? Like, in Dark Souls 2, they had like a nice running attack and stuff like that. Now, granted, I'm not a Dark Souls 2 PvPer, but like I remember watching people use it, and I was like, wow, that's actually quite nice. Dark Souls 3, I mean, the axes were kind of limited to a very small amount that were actually considered decent, such as the man-serpent hatchet, because that one was the longest and in most cases the most damaging and went around shields. But I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, the majority of axes in Elden Ring just have absolutely nothing going for them. And it sucks. It really does. And it makes you wonder how they can even fix it. Because similar to how they chose really bad animations to balance spears in this game, axes have a moveset that, like, if you give it more forward momentum, it's not going to look right. If you give them more speed, it's not going to look all that right. Like, they literally just chose, like, the perfect ergonomics of these moves to just make it to where the typical fixes for a weapon probably are not going to be considered just because of how stupid they're going to make the weapon look. So it really begs the question, like, what niche could standard axes carve out for themselves? You know what I'm saying? Like, what could they do to make something like this, like, actually have a place and a purpose? Because it's like, you could run the warped axe, you could, but you could also run the stone club if you want to use a short weapon that has, you know, both your hands on it. Because I'd argue that it looks faster at the very least, and then it also has some stupidly early hyper armor, right? And axes don't get that. They don't get to trade. I mean, you can with sword stance, but that doesn't count. Anything can trade when you have storm dance, sword dance on it. The only thing I can really guess is that they add a unique axe, Ash of War, to the DLC, because, like, literally the entire thing carrying this class of weapons are a very small handful of outliers, right? In the form of weapons that have a really good Ash of War, that have a unique R2 that's even still, like, not that great, but just really fun to play with. And then also just be the Warp Axe, which was originally designed to be a great axe, so it has the damage of a freight train crashing into a Ford Escort. Like, yeah, if you don't have one of these, like, specific things going for you, then, like, the weapon is just, like, screwed in this weapon class. And, like, for example, like, say thrusting swords, for example, right? Thrusting swords, like, you have maybe the strongest single weapon in the game, which is the Clean Rot Spear. There's a huge discrepancy between how good that weapon is and what is perhaps the worst weapon in the weapon type, which is the rapier, just the base rapier. But you know what? The moveset is so strong on its own that even though it is the worst in the weapon class, I would argue that it's significantly better than any axe if you're discounting the hand axe and the Stormhawk Axe, because they have unique things about them. Right, if you're comparing the status quo to the status quo, like, it's not even comparable in my opinion. Also, once again, what? Yo, I don't understand how people don't know that you can jump over this Ash of War. Like, it's the most counterable Ash of War in the game. But it's okay. But with that being said, this is just about the end. I've had it with this guy's light rolling, so I pull out the halberd with the offhand axe. This setup legitimately slaps. You should give this a try if you haven't. And with that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed my rambling, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.